Hello everyone, welcome to this video. In this video I'm going to talk about the verb or phrase. To begin with, you need to understand that verbs could be classified according to the way they behave in sentences. And accordingly, we could have two types of verbs, lexical verbs and auxiliary verbs. Lexical verbs include verbs such as the ones that you can see in front of you: say, eat, walk, and travel. Auxiliary verbs, on the other hand, could be also divided into two types: primary auxiliary verbs and modal auxiliary verbs. The primary auxiliary verbs include do, have, and be. And modal auxiliary verbs include the lists that you can see in front of you, starting with can, may, shall, will, to the end, and to the end of the list. And one of the basic ideas that you need to understand has to do with the structure of verb or phrases. Now, the verb or phrase could contain only one word, and that would be the main verb. But sometimes verb or phrases could be of two words or three or four. The maximum, as you should know, the maximum words that we can find in a verb or phrase is 4. And since we could have more than one word in the verb or phrase, then you need to understand that auxiliaries, the possible auxiliaries that can occur in a verb or phrase, should be arranged in certain order. And according to that order, we need to, the modal auxiliary should be the first auxiliary, and the second auxiliary should be the perfect auxiliary. And that is have. The perfect auxiliary is have. And the third auxiliary should be the progressive auxiliary, and the fourth one should be the passive auxiliary, and this is the verb to be. One of the basic ideas that you need to keep in mind is that auxiliaries affect what follows. Meaning, the modal auxiliary has an effect on what follows. It could be followed by another auxiliary, or it could be followed by the main verb. In either way, if we have a modal auxiliary, then what follows should be in its base form. However, if we were to use the perfect auxiliary, that is have, then have has an effect on what follows. And what follows have should be in the past participle. However, if we were to consider the progressive auxiliary, we all know what that is. It's the verb to be. Now, the verb to be has an effect on what follows, and what follows should contain the ing participle. While the passive auxiliary, and again it is the verb to be. Now, if we were to use the verb to be as the passive auxiliary, that is to change the voice of this sentence, then what follows should be in the past participle. So keep these things in mind, and later we will talk about the sequence of auxiliary verbs. You need to pay attention to verbal forms. You need to pay attention to how the main verb could vary in form. how the main verb could change its form. And accordingly, we have more than one form. The first one is the base form. That is to use the verb in its base form without any addition. The second form is the S form. That is the third singular S form. Okay, when we add an S to a verb, the third form is the ing form. That is the ing participle. When we add an ing to a verb, especially to express the progressive aspect. And the ed form. And the ed form could be the ed past tense, when we add an ed to the verb to express the past tense, or it could be ed past participle. And each of these forms are used in different contexts. Let's go over these forms one by one and when they are used, in which contexts they are used. Let's start with the base form. Now, the base form, as you can see, is using the main verb without any addition, such as call, drink, and put. And there are three possible scenarios in which we use the base form. The first one, we use the base form in all the present tense sentences except third person singular. So look at the example. We can say, I call every day, you call every day, we call every day, they call every day. In all of these sentences, with these different subjects, we use the verb in its base form without any addition. The second scenario in which we use the base form when we have imperative sentences. Look at the example. Call at once. Give me some water. Stop talking. Now, in all of these sentences, again, we use the verb in its base form. The third scenario in which we use verbs in their base forms, when we have the subjunctive construction. As you can see in the example, he demanded that she call and see him. Now, call and see him are being used in their base form. We did not add an ed. If you pay attention to the verbs call and see, both of them are used in their base forms. That is without any addition. And if you pay attention to the main verb that is demanded, it is in the past tense, and ed was added to the verb. However, both of the verbs call and see are being used in their base form, and that's because this sentence contains a subjunctive structure. The final scenario in which we can use verbs in their base forms, when we have bare infinitives. Look at the examples. He may call. Now, he may call, as I told you, may is a modal auxiliary, and we all know that whatever follows modal auxiliaries should be in its base form. Hence, we have call in its base form, in its infinitive form without any addition. And if we have, so there is the bare infinitive and we have the to infinitive, as in he wants her to call. He wants her to call. Now, to call, this is to infinitive, meaning to followed by a verb in its base form. That is without any addition. The second form is the S form. Simply, we can use the S form. We can add an S to a verb if the tense of the action is a present. This is one. 2, if the subject is third person singular. Okay, so look at the examples. Calls, drinks, and puts. As in, he calls every day, she calls every day, it calls every day. The third form is the ing participle. The ing participle. Mainly, the ing participle is used to express the progressive aspect. Okay? So that is in the present participle, present progressive. And we could have verbs such as calling, drinking, putting. Now, there are 2 possible scenarios in which we use the ing participle. The first one, when we want to express the progressive aspect, as in he's calling in a moment. He's calling in a moment. So this is the first scenario. The second scenario, in which we use the ing participle, when we have ing participle clauses, as in calling early, I found her at home. Now, calling early, this is what they call ing participle clause. Now, the other form is the ed past form. And there is only one scenario in which we use this form, that is the past tense. Whenever we want to express an action in the past tense, then we use the ed past or the ed form. Look at the example. He called yesterday. Now pay attention to the verb called. We added an ed to this verb. And here is the thing. You need to understand that when it comes to adding an ed to express the past tense, you need to keep in mind that verbs could be regular, to which we add ed, and verbs could be irregular, and those should be memorized. Okay, so keep that in mind. And the last form is the ed participle. And there are 3 scenarios in which we use the ed past participle to be accurate. The first scenario, when we want to express the perfective aspect. The perfective aspect. As in, look at the example. He has drunk the water. He has drunk the water. Has drunk, this is the verbal phrase. Has is the perfect auxiliary. Drunk is the main verb. However, it is being used in its past participle form. So that was the first scenario. The second scenario is the passive voice. When we want to change the voice of the sentence from the active to the passive, then we need to use the verb in its past participle form. Look at the example. He is called Jack. He's called Jack. Is called. Now, this is the auxiliary, and it is the passive auxiliary, voice auxiliary. It changes the voice. Therefore, we need to use the following verb, that is the main verb, in its past participle form. And the third scenario, in which we used ed past participle, that is an ed participle clauses, such as this one, called early, he had a quick breakfast. Now, called early, this is a clause, and it is known as ed participle clause. That's it for the main verbal forms. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.